Welcome back, everybody, to the GSMC Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just got done talking about the House v. NCAA settlement, and now we're going to talk about Caitlin Clark and if she is being targeted right now in the WNBA. Before I ask my guests some questions, I'm just going to lay out some background information. So on Saturday, the Chicago Sky and the Indiana Fever went head-to-head, with the Fever winning the game 71-70. It was a full house at the Cambridge Fieldhouse for the first WNBA matchup between Reese and Clark, and they pretty much picked up where things left off at college. This game was very physical, very heated. In the third quarter, Clark was waiting for an inbound pass, and out of nowhere, Chennedy Carter shoved Clark hard enough to send her crashing to the floor. Reese was on the bench at the time, but jumped out of her seat and started applauding for Carter. The two guards had been going back and forth pretty much for a few possessions earlier in the frame, but there was no apparent reason for Carter to escalate the situation to such a hard foul. The referees briefly reviewed the incidents but did not upgrade it to a flagrant or technical. After the game, Carter refused to answer questions about what happened. Clark, for her part, called it not a basketball play, during her in-game interview between the third and fourth quarters. And then Fever head coach Christy Sides called Carter's foul, quote, unacceptable on social media and said, quote, something has to be done. Clark also spoke about the overall physicality she had encountered so far in the WNBA, and she said, it is what it is. I feel like I'm at the point where you have to accept it and don't retaliate. Just let them hit you, be what it is. Don't let it get in your head and know it's coming. I think at this point I know I'm going to take a couple hard shots a game, and that's what it is. And then during Monday's Sky media availability, both Carter and Reese spoke to reporters. Carter said she had no regrets about Saturday's game. And then Reese defended her teammate, saying that she's taken accountability for what happened and we've moved forward from that. And then also Carter had posted about Clark on social media, saying she isn't much of a star without a three-point shot. And then, as we know, Angel Reese has expressed some negative feelings towards Clark, mainly built up from their rivalry because Clark is getting most of the credit and attention for the increase in women's basketball. Because of all this chaos, the question I have is Caitlin Clark being targeted in the WNBA? Clark's previous...
sorry about that.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add one more thing, that Clark's previous coach had spoke on it as well, and he said that it's kind of rookie hazing and also being targeted. So, yeah, Thomas, sorry for interrupting on you. What were you saying about her, if she's being targeted or not?
Yeah, no worries at all. It is one of those things where I do think to a certain extent, right? When you're a number one pick coming in from a draft class that is as star-studded as this one, there is going to be a little bit of that energy, right? As I have put it a couple of different times when I've been talking to people about this, they're going to lace up their sneakers just a little bit tighter because they know how good of a player she is. And I know, from watching Steph Curry over the past, 15 years and everything, the way to kind of get to him, the way to knock him off his game is to play physical, is to make sure that you're picking him up at half court or even beyond that and making sure that you don't give him any space. And sometimes that gets a little aggressive. So the Chennedy Carter situation obviously is something that you have to discourage as much as possible. And you have to make sure that it's not in the sport as much as you can. But to a certain extent, they are competitors and they are going to, be aggressive towards a girl that probably needs to be played a little bit aggressively to stop her. So it's definitely one of those things where you don't want it to cross a certain line, and that's obviously kind of a fine line. But to a certain extent, this is kind of just sports, and it is competitors just kind of going at it, and there is that line. But as long as people don't jump it too often, then I think it won't be too much of an issue, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Thomas. I think Caitlin Clark is being targeted. This whole chaos just makes me really frustrated because women's basketball is finally getting the attention it deserves, and then this controversy just sort of takes away from the game, if that makes sense. I don't think the treatment and controversy surrounding Clark has been fair by any means, and I think she gets a lot of the bad end of the stick because she is so famous and has been helping increase the sport's popularity. Now, Thomas, has something like this happened in men's sports, or is this more of a, new thing that's happening?
So it's interesting because in men's sports, at least over the last, since I've been, watching it and been really paying attention, there hasn't necessarily been a figure like Caitlin Clark. There's been people that have been close. There's been people that have been super influential for men's sports, but there hasn't been someone that totally turns the sport on its head and maybe makes it a very profitable league and maybe, turns over the league the same way that some people are saying Caitlin Clark will do. So there's not necessarily a good comparison to be made, but there is, number one overall picks or really highly touted guys that come into the NBA or the NFL, and they do get, more attention. They do get a little bit more energy, and that's on and off the field. So sometimes you are going to guard someone a little bit more aggressively if they are this highly touted person, because part of you is, that competitor that wants to put them kind of in their place and show, this isn't college anymore. This is, the big time, and you have to play a little bit tougher and be a little bit more aggressive to do that. So it's one of those things that there's not a great example necessarily between Caitlin Clark to a men's sport, at least of the last, decade or so. But there is, aggression towards newer players that are highly touted, that get a lot of love, and sometimes they can handle it, sometimes they can't. But Caitlin Clark seems to be, taking this kind of in stride and letting it kind of roll off her back, which is likely the best thing to do in this situation.
Yeah, no, she's been handling it really well. I definitely think this is a bit different just because it's also been more like on social media and stuff, has been way more involved with it, and also post-game interviews and stuff. Like, so many players are talking about Clark after the game. Like, the amount of times that Angel Reese has brought up the fact that she deserves more credit, and I do think that Angel Reese does deserve more credit, don't get me wrong, but it just seems that on the court, Clark's getting noticed, but then off the court, people are targeting her off the court as well. Like, it just seems like there's so much to it. Now, how do you think incidents like this impact the perception and growth of women's basketball?
Yeah, so it's a funny thing because in sports, when we all of us love drama, right? We love kind of rivalries. We love people going at each other a little bit. So there is part of me that kind of enjoys this rivalry. It is two really fantastic players that will likely be huge parts of this league going forward for the next decade or so. So part of me is really into that. And the competitor part of me is, I totally understands that. But there is the worry that, this overshadows the game. And I think a lot of people have shared that sentiment on, Twitter and different things that I've seen, where it feels like people are, getting a little bit tired of talking about a tweet or talking about, what someone said in a post game instead of talking about what actually happened in the game. So there is that, fine line, as we talked about, where you don't want to, go too far and only cover the off the court stuff, because then you won't get the proper recognition for people like Angel Reese or for the other incredible players across the WNBA like Aja Wilson, Arika Ugubawale. So there are incredible people across the league, and you don't want, a sideshow per se off the court to take away from the actual game. But at the same time, there is that rivalry, and some people absolutely do love that. So you can kind of utilize this in two different ways. You can make it kind of a selling point for the WNBA going forward, or it could kind of hurt the league depending on how much it's focused on, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think this whole thing helps, but hurts women's sports at the same time. On one hand, such incidents can, reinforce those negative stereotypes and biases that some people hold about women's sports, like being less professional or serious compared to men's sports. Like, this perception contributes to a lack of respect and reduces that credibility for the women's league, as audiences might perceive chaos as petty or over dramatized. I obviously don't see it that way, but I want to make it clear that there are some people out there who do see it like that. However, it's important to recognize that these incidents also drive increased visibility and interest in the WNBA. Controversies and high-intensity encounters can draw public and media attention, particularly attracting viewers who might not otherwise watch women's basketball unless there is some drama involved. But I also do want to point out that women athletes often do face a greater scrutiny for their behavior than their male counterparts, with similar acts on the field or court being interpreted differently. Like, for instance, physicality and aggressive confrontations in men's sports are viewed as natural and acceptable, while in women's sports they sometimes are viewed as signs of indiscipline or lack of sportsmanship. This double standard can exacerbate certain existing prejudices and might lead some fans and sponsors to view women's league as less worthy of attention and support, and I would obviously hate to see that. But at the same time, it is also doing wonders for the sport of increasing visibility and popularity and other aspects. But yeah, it does drive away from the game, and that's not great also. There's benefits and issues too. So Thomas, do you have anything else that you wanted to add on that note?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it all. It's definitely a very weird issue and going to be one that develops. But yeah, I think we covered it.
Okay, awesome. So we're now going to move on to our next segment. And with that, our guest is going to lead the show for today. Tune into Thomas's show, which I will have linked in the YouTube description, GSMC College Football Podcast. Thank you, Thomas, so much for joining. I really appreciate all your time and impact on both of these topics. Oh. There were some technical issues right here. I'm so sorry. But Thomas did have to leave. So I will see you guys. Oh my goodness. I'm having so many technical difficulties. I am so sorry. Okay, we're going to be taking a very short break. So I will see you guys very, very soon.